Hi, my name is Stefan Guzy, and I want to talk about the earliest ownership of the Voynich manuscript. I'm a trained typographer, so my background is typography, book design, and throughout my life I've dedicated a lot of time to research old documents and especially early modern manuscripts. As everyone knows, the earliest owner is a guy called Hoshitski. This is ex libris of him, written on the first folio page of the manuscript. I started doing research on him by browsing through archival material in Czech archives, especially in the Prague State Archive, and other material I found in Vienna. And I found some new stuff. This is his testament in a file in Prague, which is very interesting, but as you can see, there's no illustration of the manuscript. There's just books mentioned in general or belongings to him. There's a note in the file on his desk that he gave some of his books to friends just before he died. So this could be an option how the manuscript just got into new hands. I also found a lot of new letters from him on several topics, nothing specially here. And what's also interesting is that this number visible, as you can see here, and another ex libris of him. And this was not so unusual to number books. Like scholars back then had a couple of books, so some of them put shelf mark in them. And what you can see here is a list of an inventory of books of a so-called Verlassenschaftsabhandlung, and this is a kind of inventory made after a death of the person. And in this case, you have a really detailed list of all the books that belong to this person. And I was desperately looking for such a list of Hoshitski. I didn't find any because in the 19th century, a lot of these lists have been destroyed. Let's go back to the fact we will talk about a lot in this lecture. That is the fact that the Marcy letter, everyone knows, says that Rudolph II bought the book for 600 ducatos. That means gold coins, probably florin, which is a precise amount of money and a lot of money back then. That's Rudolph. The first question is, where could it have been stored, the book? The first option could be the Hofbibliothek, that's the Imperial Library in Vienna. Back then located in a small part of a monastery, so not a real big building back then. And this is an inventory, a handwritten inventory of the late 16th century, and there's a lot of book in it, and there's no book in it that matches somehow the description of the Voynich manuscript, which of course would not have been useful in any kind of library context. Another thing is that the library had a budget of 1,000 florin for 3 years, including money for restoration issues, and like a book deal for 600 florin wouldn't fit in any of these budgets. So I doubt that the manuscript was stored in the Imperial Library. The second option is the private library of Rudolph. When he moved to Prague, he left the Imperial Library behind in Vienna. So he wasn't really interested in books, as far as I can see. And at the Hachin, the castle where he was living in Prague, there probably has been a small collection of books, and he brought some of his favorite books from Vienna to this place. So there's really there are very few facts on this library. My estimate is that like a couple of 100 books have been stored there. We know of a librarian, so it's not too small, but there's no catalog that has been done, so it's not too big. Like I think just below 1,000 volumes, probably not a big library. This collection had a focus on alchemical works because he was very interested in alchemy and all these things. So the library is also more of a practical, has had more use of practical things than precious things. So if we think of a manuscript that can be read, it also wouldn't make any sense to put it in this library. So when the Swedes looted Prague, they attacked Prague in 1648, they took a lot of valuables with them, especially books. And Rudolf acquired a big book collection from the Rosenberg family, 10,000 volumes. And this big Rosenberg collection, together with his personal private smaller collection, went to Stockholm. And luckily, the librarian in Stockholm back then, Isaac Fossius, he made a detailed list of all the books the Swedes took from Prague. So we know of a lot of the manuscripts that have been in Rudolph's collection, which is a good thing, because a lot of these manuscripts have been preserved. They're now in Leiden University. And the third option where an object could be stored, like the Voynich manuscript, is a Kunstkammer. That's a kind of private museum, private collection, where Rudolf stored all these precious things he acquired from all continents, a lot of gifts. And you can think of like a real weird, a room of weird objects and rare objects. And as you can see here on this contemporary illustration, probably most of them they were stored in chests and drawers. And there also have been inventories made of this collection. This is one where you can see some books. As you can see here, for example, some Kräuterbücher, herbal books have been mentioned here. And like most of the description is quite simple, not so super detailed. There's no manuscript mentioned that matches the description of the Voynich manuscript, but there are so many like descriptions in a general way where the manuscript could have been included, like a chest of rare books. So like this doesn't rule out that the manuscript has been in Rudolph's collection. Let's go back to the Marcy letter, mentioning the 600 florin. And what I find interesting is that the amount of money is quite precise. So when I started this research, I was thinking, why not browse through all the transactions Rudolf made? That means if I find out everything, every book-related transaction Rudolf made during his lifetime, we could maybe find a transaction that matches Voynich manuscript. And so I was looking for 600 coins, more or less. And what I did, I traveled to Vienna and browsed through a lot of material. This is a collection of files just for 4 months. So you can imagine it's like a huge amount of material. And this is just for one archive. Luckily, there have been some, you can see some index books preserved, like the Hofkammer. This is Imperial administration. They kept a journal of all ingoing and all outgoing letters. So like literally every document that arrived at the administration was registered, and every document that left the administration was registered. And this is how this journal looked like. If you believe the Marcy letter, the book has been bought, like there was money involved, then it has to be somehow noted in these books. The letter could also be wrong, like the book was gifted, or Rudolf stole the book, or you've just found it on the streets. But if he bought the book somehow, then it must be in these account books. And in total, 6,900 art history related entries have been analyzed. That's quite a lot. And I found 126 transactions of books in the whole reign of Rudolf II. This is really not a lot. If you think of a period from 1576 to 1612, it's just not. It's a couple of books each year. I compiled all these transactions, and really the majority of all the transactions are so-called Verehrungen, salutations. And this is when someone just gifted something to Rudolf as a present, and then he got some money in return as just a thank you present. So obviously Rudolph had no influence on the topic of these books, and usually they went directly to the Imperial Library. One deal interesting to mention is he bought for 600 thaler, that's 700 florin, a couple of books from his court antiquarian Jacobo Strada. I don't know how much, like the files say, a couple of books, so probably a small collection. The biggest deal he ever made was acquisition of 530 manuscript plus a sculpture from also a historian called Sambucus. But this is a deal his predecessor Maximilian II made, so he wasn't really involved in the idea of acquiring these manuscripts. But he was a fan of Dürer, which was famous back then already. And he acquired probably for 200 florin a book of drawings of Dürer. And there was a lot of letters involved, so he was really keen to get hands on this precious volume. And this is interesting because this is the thing he was really interested in. And he spent 200 florin for it, probably a little bit more, I don't know. But so 600 florin for a book like the Voynich manuscript really seemed somehow just too much money. If you compare this to the 200 he spent for the Dürer, and he was a fan back then. And then he also was interested in herbaria, books with dried plants and descriptions, and he was able to buy 4 of these precious things from a guy called Leonhard Rauwolf. And then I found a transaction which really interested me, because this is an acquisition of books, and he rarely acquired books. Like, as I said, most of the books were gifted to him. And he, in this case, he acquired books, and he paid 500 thaler for it. And the entry here just says that a guy called Carl Widemann, a physician in Augsburg, sold a couple of manuscripts, there's no number given, for 500 thaler. And I published a book once about another manuscript, and I knew that 500 thaler would be 600 florin, because the currency exchange rate back then was 5 to 6. So what if he didn't pay the seller 500 thaler but 600 florin? It could be the 600 florin from the Marcy letter. So I was super interested in this transaction, and as usual back then, the emperor wasn't directly involved in these kinds of transactions. He had a kind of agent for it. In this case, the guy was called Zacharias Geizkofler, and he was, you can say, finance minister, a person involved in financing all these things, dealing with the Fuggers back then. And he also was in Augsburg, so he was the right guy to talk to Wiedemann about this transaction and to pay him. And all these books of the office back then have been burned in the 30 Years' War. But luckily, Geizkofler's widow had some trouble with the emperor about money, obviously. She kept a copy of the files. I tracked them down in the family archive of Geizkofler. And this is situated in Ludwigsburg. So I traveled to Ludwigsburg to check these copies of the account books of the Geizkofler administration. And there has been like a small file, as you can see here, 1599. And in this small file, I finally found a transaction. Carl Widemann, the physician from Augsburg, he sold books to the emperor for 600 florin. As you can see here, he was not paid in thaler, he was paid in florin, in guilders. So this is, for me, looks like it could be the transaction. And so the next thing would be, who is this person? Who is Carl Widemann? And what are the other books? As a lucky fact, first, Wiedemann's handwriting is quite distinguishable, so it could be easily identified. And as we know, a lot of these alchemical manuscripts out of Rudolph's personal library are now in Leiden via the Swedish looting. So if you look at the Fortius collection of alchemical manuscripts, I could identify a couple of books all about alchemical things that for sure have been in the the transaction, the 600 florins transaction. And I also found out some other books that probably have been included in this collection, like this small one. It's a manuscript about alchemical experiments Widemann did, like a kind of personal alchemical lab diary, something like this. This is now preserved in Strahov. This is a library of a monastery close to Prague. And this also bears a shelf mark of a former other library of a monastery. So probably a lot of the books stored in Rudolph's personal library also have been scattered in the last days of the war, before the Swedish looted the rest. As you can see from the books stored in Leiden, some of them were rebound by the Imperial bookbinder, so they have a beautiful coat of arms on it, and they definitely look like they are part of the private collection of Rudolph, but a lot of them don't have any special shelf marks or binding. I also checked the tax registers in Augsburg, the city tax, and after Widemann sold the books for 600 florin to the emperor, he doubled his net worth. So this was like a real big deal for him. And the archival material out of Augsburg also reveals that his landlord was Dr. Rauwolf, the person who sold the herbaria to Rudolf II. And Widemann lived in his house, and after the death of Rauwolf and Rauwolf's widow in 1597, he started to sell books to the emperor in 1598, immediately after his death. This could be a coincidence, but I also think that maybe some of the books Rauwolf owned were sold by Widemann to the emperor, though maybe the manuscript, the Voynich manuscript, could be out of Rauwolf's inheritance. And also these two families are somehow related. The Widemann family even gave a loan to the Rauwolf family in an amount of 600 florin, the exact same amount Widemann was dealing with the emperor. And I believe for further research that the vast amount of archival material stored especially in the Vienna archives, must somehow contain more information on this issue. Like I spent a lot of time on doing the research, but there's still a lot of material left to be analyzed. So I believe in the near future that some new files will be discovered, and we know more about what has been in these small barrel of remarkable books. Thank you.